My name is Huples Kittens. As a retired nurse and as a retired hospital administrator, I'm biased actually to perceive first responders in a different way from most of the public.
I think their work is pretty heroic and frequently goes unreported by the news media. I also think their work is something of a mystery to the general public, whose only exposure may be what's depicted on television programs and movies.
They're not heroes and they're not saints. They're just well-trained professionals. They have human qualities and human faults, as do we all. But the critical difference in how I perceive them is I don't see them as individuals. I see them as team members working with multidisciplinary teams to deal with real tough things that need a really calm and multidisciplinary approach. So let's see, when everything fails lecture, how they deal with first responders and what they do.
While perhaps making for good entertainment, this doesn't really capture reality.
Media often portrays first responders as flawed loners, but that's far from the truth. It's being a member of a well-organized team and having lots of training with that team, doing different tasks and analyzing the responses that went right and went wrong that actually make first responders great. Of note, 911 operators, security guards, members of the public are also often first responders. I would also like to further point out that stereotypes can be harmful even if they're positive.
If there were to be a disaster, a crisis, an incident where you had to put into place the plans that we've discussed in prior sessions, there would also likely be a response, and probably a significant response, from the police, the fire department, emergency medical service agencies, and hospital emergency departments. So there's value in understanding how they're organized and what they do, so you can better interact with them.
Let's go back to the early 1980s.
January 13th, 1982, in Washington, D.C. It was a cold and snowy day. The temperatures were in the mid-20s, and there were off and on periods of snowfall, some of it heavy, resulting in a total accumulation of over 7 inches by the day's end.
Or as we call it in Canada, July.
The federal government dismissed employees early in the afternoon, and the roads and mass transit lines quickly became congested.
No, this is not going to be a description of a multi-car pileup in the snow. No, this is the Air Florida crash.
National Airport was closed on and off all afternoon in the heavy snows. Planes were hosed down with solution and de-iced, and at 3:30 this afternoon the runways were reopened. Planes lined up, and 15 minutes later Air Florida's Flight 90 would take off. It was bound for Tampa and then on to Fort Lauderdale. The plane began its climb, usually a steep and twisting climb to follow the river. But from eyewitness descriptions, this flight took a sudden plunge toward the 14th Street Bridge. Lloyd Krieger was in his car on the bridge when the plane went down just 150 feet away.
You know, and all of a sudden, you didn't see anything, then all of a sudden this plane just come dropping right out of the sky, right at you. And all I did was scream.
The reality often is just screaming. That's often the response from untrained people.
Its nose was up, its tail was down, the tail section hit the bridge and it went right off into the water.
At the time, 3:45, the bridge was clogged with traffic, an early rush hour mandated by the heavy snow. The plane shared across cars and a truck. Some vehicles were literally crushed. Others had their tops torn off.
You want to be a first responder, good on you, but be aware of the fact that most of the work is boring, mundane, and repetitive. Hollywood just looks at the drama and makes it seem attractive and dynamic and an individual thing that you can push through and fix. Also, I'd point out that not every first responder has great teeth, great hair, and beautiful looks. Another problem with mainstream media and often public perception is the ratio of workers. For example, there's enormous amounts of doctors in most TV programs like ER and others, and very few nurses. And in fact, where you have a lot of nurses, you often don't have the support personnel like the cleaners and the porters and a whole bunch of other people who are utterly critical to the functioning of the hospital or the first response scenario.
Commutes home extended to multiple hours longer than usual. And in fact, some persons simply gave up and resolved to pass the time in local restaurants or bars, or even to spend the night in area hotels.
This is why you always carry cash. If the internet's down, you can probably buy taxis and a hotel room if you have sufficient quantities of cash.
At some times, visibility dipped below half a mile due to overcast and snowy conditions. This wasn't necessarily a disaster, but it could be classified as a weather emergency, as first responders would anticipate problems such as traffic jams, traffic accidents, and potential difficulties responding to calls for service. The 14th Street Bridge, which crosses the Potomac River between Arlington County, Virginia and Washington, D.C., was slow going and crowded with cars. At 4 o'clock p.m., Air Florida Flight 90, a Boeing 737 jet aircraft, took off from National Airport. At 4:01 p.m., less than a mile from the runway, witnesses reported that it was nose up but sinking, as though it couldn't become fully airborne. The plane struck the 14th Street Bridge, killing 4 persons and injuring 4 on the bridge. It then crashed into the frozen waters of the Potomac River. Most passengers and crew were killed on impact, but 6 were able to escape to the icy and frigid waters of the Potomac.
As you heard on the black box recording, no one in the air or on the ground really had time to react to the fact the plane's icing had failed and it was going down. This is why you need to have comfortable shoes on and good quality clothing on for the entire duration of any airline flight you're on. If it goes down suddenly, that's not the time to try and figure out how to get out of a burning plane after a major air crash without shoes on. And I always keep my seatbelt buckled at all times, except when I'm going to and fro to the washroom, as should you. It's not being frightened, it's actually being smart. The chance of needing it is minuscule, but if I do need it, if it's already buckled, that's a good thing.
A massive response effort was launched. Fire departments from National Airport, Washington, D.C., Arlington County, Virginia, Fairfax County, Virginia, and Alexandria, Virginia responded. So did police officers from Arlington County, Washington, D.C., and the U.S. Park Police.
This is one of the heroes, doing what they've trained to do, but in a highly unusual and unexpected way. Teamwork, training, means a successful response. The plans they've already enacted and thought about and discussed in their teams now go into play and work. And if they don't work, they actually adjust the plan and the response as if they're doing the job.
A fireboat and harbor patrol vessel attempted to respond, but were unable to do so because of the ice in the river. Through the work of these agencies, 5 of the 6 persons in the water were rescued and transported to local hospitals. Certainly, the most dramatic scenes were those in which the Park Police helicopter was hovering over the water, at times with its landing skids dipping into the water, transporting persons to the riverbank.
Look, this is incredibly dramatic and intense, and most first responder work is not. But they're faced suddenly out of the blue with a bunch of people in icy cold water who are seconds, not minutes, seconds away from death. Now, I have no idea why, when everything fails, didn't use some pictures from the scene. There is some horrible pictures, so careful if you're looking for it yourself. So I found some photographs of you. Never forget the ground controllers and the pilot is actually also acting in heroic and unusual and stressful ways during these rescues. It's not just the winch guy. And remember, volunteers are going to risk everything as well.
When one victim fell back into the water, a bystander swam in to pull her to safety. One man in the water, passenger Arland Williams, passed each rescue line to other victims until they were all rescued. Sadly, when the Park Police returned to rescue him, the last survivor in the water, he had disappeared and drowned. The bridge was renamed in his honor as the Arland D. Williams Jr. Memorial Bridge.
I kind of think he deserved a photograph in this lecture. He passed the safety rope that he grabbed 5 times to the other 5 people in the water around him so they would be saved, and they were saved. It takes true guts to do that. Really, it takes true guts and control and empathy to do that. Disaster often brings out our best angels, even at the cost of our own lives, rather than our worst angels.
74 persons lost their lives in the incident. Investigators found that the cause of the crash was improper de-icing and continuing the takeoff despite potential problems indicated on the cockpit instruments.
There is no question that the ground crew were absolutely negligent in this situation. Faulty training, faulty response, and they were slack. However, the senior pilot did ignore pre-existing safety protocols that demanded an abort of the mission and did things in certain ways that should not have been done. It led to the plane trying to take off, and it did successfully take off. It just couldn't stay in the air. People get slack.
The tragic day was not yet over for Washington, D.C.
What?
At about 4:30 p.m., a Metro subway train derailed, killing 3 and injuring 25, while leaving 1,300 persons stranded on the train itself in need of evacuation. The train had inadvertently been switched onto the wrong track, and in backing up to correct course, struck a wall in the tunnel, which crushed part of a train car.
This is where you sit in the middle carriage of a train, with your back preferably to the engine. If you can, it's also quite handy to sit near an emergency window. Again, this isn't paranoid. This takes about 2 seconds or 3 seconds of thought, and then you forget about it.
The Metro Transit Police Department responded, as did the Washington, D.C. Fire Department, with other agencies providing assistance. Together, they worked to help evacuate injured persons while also leading others trapped on the train to safety.
This is why you always have a flashlight and a decent pair of shoes on you. If you can, also have a decent pair of gloves and a small crowbar on you if you can. Knowing what the third rail is and where it is also a really nice thing to know before you get on any sort of train, including subways. Of note, pretty much you're always going to be told as a passenger to stay in place to await developments. But if you think it's a sudden flood or a tsunami, assess, think, and you might want to exit and go upwards without the advice of the guard, and they may be upset if you do that.
Investigators found the cause to be multiple failures in operating procedures.
This is code for the fact that many people effed up, but the senior leadership who effed up are going to be protected.
Here's why I'm telling you about this incident. In order to manage the confluence of a snow event, an airline crash, and a mass transit accident, response agencies had to demonstrate a variety of qualities that continue to define their work. First, they must be prepared for anything, including the unexpected.
So should you. Train for this. Go on a hike and simulate the loss of all water or a shoe. Simulate adversity when it's safe to do so. Add in unexpected things. Take extra weight because you have to carry the dog.
They must work well together. In each aspect of the January 13th incident, multiple agencies had to collaborate with one another.
They train for this and are prepared for it. In SHTF, will your friends and family and yourself be able to work collaboratively in adverse conditions for a long period of time? You all must.
They utilized what's called mutual aid, in which one department can call upon the assistance of another, even if it's out of their jurisdiction.
This is actually now widely used in Canada for long-term care homes and group homes. I don't think it's widely used in prepping, but perhaps it should be. If, say, Louis Mosaicmaster 1 in Puerto Rico suffered in a devastating house fire.
My brother tells me that my father brought this flower once. Look at this.
Should I not, if I can, go there and help him? Should I not, if I can, have him come here and live here? Preppers helping preppers is something we should maybe be looking at more formally if we survive 2022. I am aware, Louis, that I am much more likely to require your help than you are to require mine.
And they utilized incident command, meaning a set of principles to ensure that each responder knew what his or her role was at the scene.
Look, this is absolutely critical for all responses. Ad hoc, as people feel like it, is not workable in almost all disasters.
They must have the resources necessary to do their jobs, even in what are called surge situations, in which demand is significantly higher than normal.
Yeah, physical and mental. Sure, you've got 3 years of MREs stored up, but can you move around easily in SHTF? Can you move the MREs around easily in SHTF if you need to? Sure, you have a water filter. Do you actually understand the science of water filters and how they actually work and how you can troubleshoot them and what might go wrong with one in ways that you don't know? Or how can you fix one that goes wrong? Like, going beyond the buying a packet and throwing it in a cupboard is a good idea. Having the gear is a great idea. Knowing how the gear works is a much better plan.
Until next time, stay safe.
That's it. Hope you enjoyed it. Next time, who are first responders and what do they actually do? What on earth's a PSAP? Are funeral homes good for ambulances? What's E911? What's ANI-AZI? When people talk about next generation 911, what are they talking about? Can you effectively call 911? Do you know what's expected of you when you call 911? Have you ever called 911? Law enforcement officers, fire services, ambulance. What do they actually do? Are there different types of them? Are the responses different? What can you do as a victim or as a bystander or as a first responder do to assist paid first responders and volunteer first responders? Because remember, a lot of fire services are volunteers. Anyway, I was out with a bit on how emergency departments have changed over the years, and I may or may not make that a big thing, and I might take that out of the video and actually do a video on how hospital care has changed over the last 30 years, because I'm aware of how it was, and I'm aware of how it is. Toodles. This has been a Sleeping Terrier production, 2022.